In a world where disruption is no longer rare but routine, how do we move forward? From climate extremes to rising urban populations, supply chain strain to geopolitical tension, these forces reshaping our world are putting pressure on the transportation networks that keep it moving. Each of these forces adds a layer of complexity. Together, they're not just testing infrastructure, they're challenging how we design, build, and operate it. In this reality, resilience isn't about bouncing back. It's about being ready and building smarter systems that adapt and endure. Today's pace makes it harder to build resilient systems. Tight schedules, disconnected data, and little visibility across agencies, phases, and between the surface and subsurface. Resilience starts with understanding, with clarity of conditions, context, and potential risk. It's built on accurate data, accelerated by AI, and strengthened by better decisions made early and often. It's how we shift from reacting to anticipating, avoiding costly delays, rework, and risk before it happens. Today's panel brings together transportation owners, engineers, and contractors to discuss how the industry is embracing this technology, not just to respond to disruption, but to rise above it. Because resilience isn't an add-on, it's the foundation. Not just the key to building back, but also the key to building forward. To delivering transportation infrastructure that lasts, adapts, and is ready for whatever comes next.
Good day, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Whether you're joining us here in Amsterdam or virtually elsewhere in the world, we're very grateful for you joining our industry breakout in transportation around the concept of proactive resilience. I'm Bhuti Ariel, Senior Director of Transportation in our Industry Solutions Group. And today we have a wonderful conversation on this topic. I think it will go in a variety of different ways. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Pat McLaren, Segment Director of Civil in our Sequent Bentley Subsurface Company. So Pat?
Yeah, together, Bhuti and I are going to be leading this conversation on infrastructure, resiliency, and transportation. We've got a fantastic panel. We've seen a great visualization on what resiliency can mean. So let me introduce you to the panel, and we'll keep going. So we've got Michael Pearson. He's the Digital Delivery Program Manager at Oklahoma Department of Transportation. Andy Kayala. He's the Vice President of Digital Construction Management at WSB. Rafael De Santiago. He's the Digital Engineering Lead, System Lead at Acciona. And Holger Kessler, he's the Senior Stakeholder Manager at Atkins Realis. So it's fantastic to have you guys here. If you want to learn a little bit more about the backgrounds of our panelists, then take a look in your mobile app, or if you're online, you can see that in the event website, and they'll elaborate a little bit more as we get into the discussion. Just so you know, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the conclusion of the discussion, and if you're online, feel free to drop questions into the chat, and we'll try and pick some of those up at the end.
Yeah, wonderful.
That kind of sets the scene where you can lead us out.
Let's get stuck in. So I guess before we dive into this topic some more, maybe what we can do is have each of you explain in your terms what resilience means to you in your world and how it manifests in what you do. So Mike, if we can start with you.
Sure, appreciate it. So Mike Pearson, Digital Delivery Program Manager, Oklahoma DOT. So that implies I'm an owner-operator. So my perspective is probably a little different than my friend here. So it's going to get kind of fun. So for me, resilience is the backbone of really how our transportation systems thrive. And that could be different things. That could be people, that could be standards, that can be, could be software. So in my role in digital delivery is really in all those different pieces. So I like to say we have to have our ecosystem and it has to connect. From an owner perspective, we have to move that data through its life cycle. We have to make sure these systems are moving information. So in that order, we also have to have the people to do that. So we like to say it's a people or a human approach. So we are getting involved like in workforce development, and we're also getting involved like in tech providers. And one of my favorite things is also getting involved with, we like our acronyms, right? So getting involved with our contractors and our consultants on different sides of the aisle. So building that resiliency or that resilience through partnerships, building it through our ecosystems is very important to us and very important to me.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. If you would like to build on that, Andy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Andy Kayala, WSB, as in better, engineering. And maybe a couple things real quick. That a lot more people here than last year, so that's good to see. And the video that we watched here at the beginning, that was the first time I saw it. That was really well done. And there's a couple things in there that I noticed that are central to this whole discussion, I think. You know, resilience means better understanding. Well, how do we get understanding? How do we get better clarity? How do we get transparency? So a lot of the conversation around digital delivery, model-centric, we'd call it model-centric design and construction management. That's our end of the philosophy that we would take as an organization, is that that's the future of both design and construction management and project delivery. It's going to revolve around that 3D environment. And you know, when we think about then defining resiliency, like what is it? How does it impact? What are we really talking about? There's a couple of things that I think are really important to keep in mind. First, Michael talked about people. I'd say think in terms of resolution of conflict. How many projects have you been on? How many projects have we all been on where it's sort of devolved into a downward spiral of conflict, either between contractor and owner or engineer, and you know, you have all these different relationships that happen, but it sort of devolves into this conflict. Well, the future, I think, around model-centric delivery, one of the main things that's alleviated is that conflict at the project level. Well, okay, that's great, that's awesome. We want better, more efficient projects, but how does that affect the people who are on those jobs, right? They take that conflict home. We're not machines. We don't wake up in the morning and take data inputs and then spit things back out. We're people, we're relational. We solve problems face to face. So that idea of being able to alleviate conflict and make people's lives better, be able to deliver the project more efficiently, all these things are related to that resiliency.
That's fantastic. We're talking about infrastructure resilience, but at the heart of it is the people that make infrastructure possible.
It is,
Yeah.
and it's also then people are enabled to do things right the first time.
Well said, well said.
Right.
Rafa, if you'd like to build on from your perspective, and maybe any regional perspectives you have in work that's being done in the ANZ region.
Okay. Yep. Rafa de Santiago, Digital Engineering System Lead for Australia and New Zealand. I think I'm going to keep on the people side, but with a different view, because we understand that these days we've got tighter budgets, we got tighter, like the schedule is always, they want us to deliver more. I come from the construction industry. So we need to deliver more in less time and on budget. But we need the key thing with people. And the lack of resources, the way that we need to produce more with the current resources that we have, managing all the conflicts and having everyone towards the same goal, it's a good example of resilience. Because, and because of that, the industry is adapting. Automation is one thing that we hear a lot. Now AI is coming a very big topic for these 2 days. So having like people with skills, at least in our region, we always struggle to have like skilled people, and therefore we need to kind of adapt ourselves to pretty much deliver more with less. I know that the word's a little bit of cliche because we hear that thing a lot, but eventually, I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel and find a different wording for that. And also, the appetite for data is one thing that has changed over the past years. That was another thing that we had to be resilient and find other ways to deliver. These days, we are not delivering only a bridge or a road. There's a package, and that package comes with data, because we need to enable digital twins in the future. So how can we tell to like a construction business, hey, you need data scientists now? So, and then it's a kind of, okay, but I thought you would come to us and say you need more machines.
Yeah.
Okay, more things to build. And, but yeah, that's just part of evolution, part of that we, like in the market, be more resilient. And
So you're not only building resilient infrastructure, the structures themselves, but also the data that supports it for future operations and maintenance.
So we, of course, everyone knows that we came from the boards, but the boards now are a little bit more smart with more data.
Yeah, thanks, Rafa. Holger, if you'd like to wrap up this.
Yeah, thanks for coming. First of all, it's nice to have a full room. I've been on terrible panels with 3 people, so I'm excited to be here.
We should have said that the first row will win a prize in the
Yes, so I work for Atkins Realis in stakeholder engagement and building relationships and partnerships. And in the rehearsal, I was meant to be the one talking about people. Now everybody seems to be picking up the topic of people in different ways, because my part is that I work in a local I volunteer in a local flood forum in England, and we have a lot of volunteers who need to get out when we need to close some roads. In fact, we're taking on sort of road closure roles as volunteers. And when a storm happens, it is just makes the town more resilient if more people know where things are and how things work and who owns and operates them. And I think so resilience, I also worked in UK government for a little while in the sort of in cabinet office who look at national resilience, is not just about the big players and the big departments, it's also about every individual being part of a system, whether it's transportation or energy. And I think we're then sort of getting into how digital data and information helps in my town, where people have now got access to maps and digital information and a WhatsApp group, and how we become resilient if we all just understand how everything works a bit better, and being able to respond and recover at a very local level, and not just at a government sort of national level.
That's very interesting, Holger. You're essentially saying that if you're not resilient to the lowest common denominator or the smallest players, then you're not really a truly resilient system.
Yeah.
Very well said.
So there's quite a few things, you know, as we come across the couches here, there's been quite a few different threads that have come out, and there's the data thread, there's the understanding, the common ground, having that not just understanding, everyone's got their own understanding, but a common understanding because it's centered on the model, so that model-centric approach to help take the conflict out. The data delivery and the community readiness, and so that's a lot of facets that you know we're talking about.
And Pat, I think ultimately Andy's wrap-up comment is, if you do it right the first time, that's how you really build a truly resilient system. So
100%. So maybe then we can just kind of head back around, and what would be great to hear is just a more tangible, some tangible example of where you have been implementing this within your organization or your relationships, or in your case, you gave the example from the community side, but maybe you could add to that with also example from Atkins business about building resiliency.
Yeah, so one thing the United Kingdom is getting better with is providing more increasing public access to useful data and information. So in terms of let's just use flood forecasting, you know, maps of flood risk and better information from the Met Office about storms. So our local flood forum, which are volunteers of all sorts of walks of life, we now have our own flood warning system on a little website, and a WhatsApp group with volunteers who go out and close off the roads, which is then coordinated with the highways department. We have the signs, we have the training. So providing increasingly better understandable and usable data is really working well. And then in Atkins, we've worked for the last 5 years with the government on a national map of all buried utilities. So we have a national underground asset register, which is currently only accessible to the departments and the utilities, but there is a potential that one day also the subsurface data, which is sort of difficult and hidden, might become accessible to communities and first responders and so on as well.
We've talked about some of these single points of failures in the utility systems as being quite a vulnerability.
And we've got some examples from Atkins Realis, but I didn't want to go into those, but just feeding back to the other side of the panel, this taking out conflicts, you've sort of probably thought of it on a project, but the amount of conflict you can take out in a local community when people just know which authority or agency is responsible to call, rather than everybody calling and going on Facebook community and everybody just stokes up a whole lot of anger. If you know this is a gully that's maintained by one authority, that just helps a lot, right?
Yeah. Rafa?
Yeah, I was thinking about the data side and the data scientists. It's funny, so I think everyone here is very familiar with Power BI, okay? So it's, from a management perspective, it's probably the tool or the interface to go to see project information, construction information. I've got a quick funny story about Power BI. So one of our design partners put a register, very fancy, with the progress of all documents, drawings, like everything was going live perfectly. And then my manager once called me on his room and said, "Mate, how can I export this to Excel?" I said, "Oh my gosh, no to Excel. You're gonna kill the whole beauty of the automation. Just click on that button." And that was 3 years ago, when we didn't have that maturity yet. But over the years, I mean, the last 2 years in our company, SCO in Australia, we invested in the data science department. And that team is mostly feeding every single information coming from the project into a huge data lake. And that data lake now, it's like, of course, using AI and all the smarts in a Power BI. We got full control of the project as it progresses. So it's a way to have a live project, and of course, everything that you already know, informed decisions, we can pretty much predict more things. Of course, when we add AI in a dashboard, so if you're like curious enough, when you open Power BI, if you've got the app at your desktop, there's an AI like a visual over there. You can add that to your Power BI, and you can start inquiring that data. It's as simple as this, all right? So the task of our team to create the awareness in the team and say, hey, you don't need to use your isolated Excel spreadsheet. By the way, like I think a few years ago, Excel was the most engineering software used in the entire world, because it can beat any CAD application, any model application, because everyone loves Excel. So I think like gradually shifting a little bit, like Power BI is competing with that. But the task to raise that awareness, say, hey, the information is there. You can see the information in different ways. All right, just interact with that information. If you're not happy with what you see in the visual, all right, there's a prompt over there. Just start inquiring the data. Yeah. And then that information will come up to you. But of course, there's a learning curve, and it's part of our resilience to keep moving with technology.
Oh, I love that example. I mean, it's so relatable. What does that spark for you, Andy?
I was thinking as you guys were talking that one way to summarize resiliency would be rapid access to the information I need to make a good business decision, right? 100%. So like all of this data and information that we talk about has existed somewhere on somebody's computer or on a piece of paper on somebody's desk, but it's the ability to aggregate that information into a place where every stakeholder on a project or a program or a government agency or across that spectrum of users where every single individual has the opportunity to access that information rapidly and then make a good decision. We haven't had that before.
Right.
Andy, can you cite an example of how you're doing that today?
Yeah, so the one way that we've been able to do that, and this is just a simple example, but just to illustrate the point, on a large project in Austin, Texas, we were working on one contract, and there was a tunnel contract that was part of another piece of work that the city was taking on. So we're developing in a 3D environment. We have our quality control process, model-centric. We're thinking pretty highly of our ability to deploy this, right? Well, what came up was there's this tunnel project. How do we get that integrated into what we're looking at? And this isn't something we'd been able to do before, to have two separate contracts in one environment. So we were able to bring that tunnel project into the same environment and realize, oh, we have a problem. One of these drop shafts is right in the middle of one of the frontage roads. That's an issue. And that tunnel project was on a faster track than the roadway project. So that's just a simple illustration. We were able to resolve it. I'm not just saying there was a problem and then we walked away. We were able to help resolve that and bring the issue to light. And that's what a lot of what we're working on right now does. That you don't think of like this model-centric world as solving all the problems. It surfaces the problems so that people can solve it.
Yep, great.
And it's a really powerful way to make better decisions.
How do you see that, Mike, then in the owner's world?
From the owner's world, I think these guys are ahead of me in some ways. So from my perspective, we have to rebuild our systems. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of discrete data and very unstructured data. Our systems have been siloed for many years. So part of that resilience is sometimes that means start over. And I know a lot of folks in this room probably don't like that, but we at Oklahoma has just recently took that gut punch and rebuilding some systems from the ground up because we don't want to do Band-Aids. We want to do it right the first time. But what that also means is data governance. What that also means is addressing those elephants in the room. And then how do you eat an elephant? One small bite at a time, not one large bite, not the whole elephant at the same time. But when you start getting in the data and really starting to understand the governance of that data and who it's going to impact and who needs that data at the right time, the right data at the right time, that's huge. And when you start thinking about it from a government perspective, then you have risk. Who is getting that data? Is the consultant? Should they have that data? Should that be in contracts that we have built into when we go in contract with WSB, Better Engineering, right?
Yeah,
okay. So when we go into contract with Better Engineering, not the best engineering. I'm just kidding.
I'm working on it.
So when we go into contract, is that vehicle have things? And I'm picking this up because I was in an advisory board meeting this week, and we were talking about the contract vehicle. And should there be something in the vehicle that we're providing data back to that consultant? Because like currently right now, it's. I was talking with my friend Ali here today. It's like today we were providing PDFs or plan sheets, and when you request data from an existing project, this is what I give you. That's current state. Future state, what does that look like? Are our systems available today to be able to provide that information? And when I do provide it, what are my assurances that is it going to be kept in my environment? Are you going to use that for other things? So you start getting into risk, you start getting into national defense perspective. What does this look like?
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for sharing your perspective on some of the things you're doing. And I guess in your case, Mike, you're essentially looking to build from the ground up to do it right the first time. And your example of how you're using model-based workflows to surface problems so that humans can solve them. And Rafa, the use of data to make better decisions. And then Holger, making information available to folks that can solve problems at the local and at the national level. I think it's great to see these different perspectives. Maybe to switch it up to more the YII, and we're here together, we're hearing some new and interesting things that were announced. Maybe I'll start back out this way. Mike, from what you saw and heard today around the concept of trustworthy AI, what we're doing with making information easier to access to make better decisions, what stuck out to you, and how do you think it will affect what you think about going forward, especially as you're looking to maybe rebuild from the ground up?
So artificial intelligence, it's here. This isn't yesterday. This thing it's growing, it's thriving. We have to embrace it as a governmental agency. I'll say that some governments aren't quite there yet, and they're trying to go through that risk-based assessment of what this means for them and how we can put that into bumpers. Just starting off with that, what it means to me is it really opens up the door to a lot of, I'm going to geek out for a minute, okay? It really starts to open up doors to things that, to me, in my generation, have always wanted to have that ability to analyze things from a much wider perspective, like from an infrastructure, like an entire statewide infrastructure perspective. And if we can do that, like we were talking about earlier today, from a defense perspective, can I do that nationally? What does that look like? But there's ethics that are involved in this too. And we have to think about what those ethics are and try to put those also in bumpers and what do those look like. You start getting into engineering. I heard some great things. Jillian's speech, the keynote today was fire. Like you guys, I don't know if they're in the room. I can't see anything. There's a very bright light in front of me. But the keynote was fire. It was really great. Where we're headed, I think, as an industry, I think we're going to do some really great things.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That's good. Yeah, AI, the thing that I get excited about is the creative opportunities, and I'll give two examples. One, shout out to one of our clients, CW Matthews in Atlanta, on a project that we were working with them on. There's all this data we're gathering around daily work reports, quality reports. We're publishing it into Synchro. We have dashboards. We have a lot of, just data visualization. We're advancing rapidly. I get an email from the project manager, and he says, hey, I put this prompt into, I don't know what AI he was using, but I put this prompt into one of the language models, and I wanted a summary of what all of the superintendents had done the previous week based on the data that they're all inputting into that Bentley Infrastructure Cloud environment. And here's what it gave me. Do you think you guys could help us develop this as a workflow so that I can publish that to my upper management every week? I thought, this is coming from one of our clients, one of the builders, somebody who's saying, hey, I have an idea, maybe I can put this thing to work. Turns out it's great. We're now publishing weekly reports to upper management. It's a summary of everything that's happened on the project. We're talking about a major infrastructure project that people are going to have rapid insight into based on the creativity of one of our clients coming back to us and saying, hey, I think we could use it this way. Can you guys help us with that? That kind of thing is really exciting, that kind of collaborative opportunity that it opens up.
Yeah.
Second example is just kind of you think of it almost as the mundane, but simple automation creation in the background within ProjectWise, or being able to connect to points that previously had a manual intervention. We've got people that are able to start to do these things who are just creative people who you give them the right tools and they solve the problem. That's really exciting that you've got the power of a new tool put in the hands of creative people.
Yeah.
You're going to have a new way of doing business.
That's fantastic. I think the terms co-innovation that were mentioned earlier, I think you referred to that.
Yeah.
And I think the point that was made earlier about spending less time looking for information and more time working and solving the problem is really excellent. Rafa?
Yeah, I like when Mike touched, when he said, and I think was very well done. So we are not talking about the future. We are about talking about now. And I'm 100% sure if I ask who in this room never ever opened any AI tool, so probably no one you raise the hand, because everyone uses, everyone is part of the life. So even if and I understand the concerns from our company perspective and for like departments of transport perspective or any organization's perspective, I think the biggest fear coming from the organizations of adoption is mostly security, like a data privacy.
Yeah.
All right. And this is one thing that we are very conscious of that. And probably the reason of most like companies, like we were talking about, talking to Mike's, okay, we cannot use Copilot to summarize an email, all right? But in order to enable that button, companies, they need to make sure that, okay, that environment is all shielded, it's all isolated. Can you imagine like people discussing like billions of dollars of tenders in a sort of like a GPT style, and that data is like leaked to the public.
Yeah.
So, of course, companies are creating their own GPTs. We've got their own Siona GPT. We use that for tenders. So we are training people to start being familiar with those like language models. So this is a good use. But there's always, the concern about how this data could be possibly like leaked to externals.
So Rafa, would you agree then that the AI being a trustworthy AI and your data being your data is an important aspect for you and the industry as a whole?
100%, because let's say that you are using AI to do optioneering for a tender.
Yeah.
So this is your input. So maybe your competitor has a different idea or a different way. So that information needs to be like locked and isolated. And I think if I can say like one of the concerns, at least from our company perspective, is like how this data is being shared like broadly. Of course, like we have like a ChatGPT in our phones. We can use the tool to help. So if you like open LinkedIn and search for AI, they have an AI for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Great photos, best way to get dressed to be here in the panel, like a best way to drive your car.
Yeah.
So it's endless possibilities.
Yeah.
But for our use, it's very powerful tool.
So you're excited by the potential of the power, but that's why the message around trustworthiness, the data being your data, and if you want to contribute, that's fair because there are probably applications for that.
Correct.
Okay.
So and then there are like a lot of like tools. As I mentioned before, we need to do more things with less.
Yeah.
With less resources. So if the AI is there as your friend, okay, it's like the tool, use it. Okay, help you to create like a presentation, help you to summarize some data, help you to like go for a specific approach, help you to digest tender information, things like that. Because and it's humanly impossible to be on top of everything. So it's a good ally.
AI as your friend. Holger, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, well, it's what happens in panels. You sort of have an idea and then you listen to the previous speakers.
Sorry
it's really interesting. I'm going to go for the creativity, and I keep looking at this tunnel design. So Atkins Realis and Arup are very proud of the Elizabeth line in London. If you haven't seen a almost on budget and almost on time delivered mega project, please come and have a go on the Elizabeth line. And what we see there in the Elizabeth line, which we are very proud of, is a really creative and a really well-designed tunnel system with lights and architectural features and thought and sound and all that. Now, that was not created by an AI because this was fresh, new creative thinking. I think we have a responsibility, particularly our generation who has still learned in a non-digital environment to be creative and craft and engineer and design things, to not leave the 2 generations after just with a load of templates and AI, but no more actual human ability and creativity. I think that is a really important part. So let's think about, in the words of Anne-Marie, who was on the panel, second panel today, what's the purpose? Let's actually think of the use case and the purpose, and not just do AI for AI's sake. Also, back to some of the things you said, let's do it right the first time. So we now, and I think another little word used last night, there is an inevitability about where this is heading. I don't think so. I think this is a democratic, this is a decision that we all make as individuals and organizations where AI in Bentley and outside Bentley is going. We shouldn't just say, oh, the tech bros somewhere are just going to do all this. No, it's we all have a role to play to shape the future of AI in construction, engineering, and planning. Because I think it is really important to, and there's also a whole bunch of discussions about waste of energy and time and electricity and water, which we can park for a moment. Let's just say we find some good use cases and useful, then let's tackle those and do those well, but also make sure people understand that there is a human. We still need human intelligence, lots of it, in the next few years, because AI, all the digital tools, if someone wise, we have an AI chat. I can recommend you all form informal chats in the organization where just random people just join and have and there was someone really wise who said there will be, for the foreseeable future, 8 billion people on the planet, and we should be considering AI and tech as one thing, but this will all affect people. So be making sure that we actually communicate and talk to people about this and involve them, because it's a democratic thing here, not just a decision made by some people who've got lots of data and lots of compute power.
I really like what you said about challenging the idea of inevitability.
Yeah.
I think that's a
We
really
own
important
this.
point.
You own the data, you own the assets.
The agency remains
We have
with
agency.
us.
Spot on.
And that, I think if you stay grounded in the real world, eventually, technology itself as a tool, right, still has to translate into, I need to go build something, I need to create the tunnel, it has to happen in the real world. And if that real world remains the filter, then we can help young people understand why we're using the tool that we're using. The tool can't ever become the point, right?
And then I'll shut up, but one more quick one, because it's right in front of us now. Why do we need, let's just really be thinking about this, why do we need AI-generated artists and film stars? We have huge amounts of really good musicians and actors and actresses. Do we want to just create AI film stars and then therefore stifle the creativity and the theaters and where all this good stuff is coming from, and then in 20 years' time, all the films are going to be very, very, very boring and look like an 80s, 90s film?
Do we have another hour we could talk just about this? No, probably.
Well, it's gone off transportation.
Yeah. Wait, let's bring it back to transportation.
I did mention the tunnel.
No, I think, to Michael's original point, it's now. So no surprise, this is conversation's going to keep going. It's going to be at every conference, every meeting we have like this. This is our reality. And so, I love the sentiment around the agency. So maybe just to kind of bring things up and then go to questions, maybe I could just ask you each in about a minute or so to kind of just give us your, in the context of transportation and building resiliency in our transportation systems, what do you think, what would you either recommend to others in your position, or what opportunity would you see would be the big opportunity to take? And let's start where the dirt gets moved, and Rafa, if you could talk to us from your perspective.
Okay, I think that's one thing that probably large projects, or some of them, are not exploring very well, is the technology behind materials. It's not related to digital, but at the end, I think it's good for resilience in construction. So we need to build more resilient infrastructure. And the conventional materials, the conventional ones, we understand that, okay, they probably could bring more costs. The carbon footprint is quite high. So explore the technology around materials to make your infrastructure more resilient, of course, with a less carbon footprint, reaching your targets in terms of financially. I think it's a good area to explore. In Australia, we've got some incentives for projects that use different materials based in recycling or any other sort of method that could bring more durability to a piece of infrastructure, road, a bridge, or tunnel. And that thing is being very important. I think that's one thing that we could use, of course, technology, maybe could AI to invent a new material or whatever, to apply this in the construction so you can meet the targets like schedule and so on.
Yeah. Okay. And from an owner's perspective, Mike, the opportunity or what you would recommend to other DOTs, for example?
Sure. I would say embedded resilience is non-negotiable. And that could be standards, that could be people, that's systems. These things have to happen. We have to build our systems to talk to each other. We have to build our people up to be able to work with these systems. And then the second thing I would like to challenge is that we also have to think about the human-centric piece of these things and not chase the bright, shiny new tool that runs out there and get that into play without trying to teach our people what it is and how to use it. I think often, especially like in government, a vendor may come show us the bright, shiny new cool tool. We'll procure it, we'll get it to them, and then we don't follow that up with the proper amount of training, and then it just sits on the shelf and we don't use it. I'm starting to see a little bit of that because there's some really cool stuff that's coming out. But we had to back that up with the proper training and investment in our own people moving forward.
Yeah, fair. Holger, you work for with a lot of government agencies and so on. So what would your recommendation be, either in that context or in the context of the consultancy business?
Perfect segue. I've been talking to people out over dinner and yesterday. I think the one thing we need to overcome is siloed thinking, not just in terms of the data, but also if we look at a road, a lot of people in the consultancy and on the government side treat the system as if that was just for moving cars and people. But it also contains utilities. It might have it might provide space to create green spaces and drainage systems alongside. It might, you might want to think of solar and wind power alongside. So systems thinking is what I try to advocate for, and that relates very much, I was saying this morning in all the keynotes, all the backgrounds was showing the world how it is, a combination of engineered and natural systems. And I think we need to get out of our departmental silos, energy here, transportation there. And I do think that data and systems, such as yours, help us potentially to come together.
Yeah, thanks, Holger. Andy, do you want to bring us home on this opportunities and recommendations?
So I think there's a call to action that's rooted in two questions. And I think the questions would be for every owner around the globe even. What am I incentivizing? That's question number one. Question number two is, am I interested in purchasing effort or value? Mm-hmm. So if you take those two questions and you start to drill down and say, how am I going to leverage access to this new technology that really does give me rapid access to better decision-making environment? I can publish it to the public and have them have better insight. How am I going to get there? It's about what you incentivize and moving towards purchasing value. So a couple of things that I'm no prophet, but I'll make a prediction. If your business model is built on billable hours, that business model is under threat right now. That's not just engineers, that's lawyers, accountants. It's every industry that really effectively is selling effort, rather than, I'll just say, selling effort. That business model is going to be under threat.
I agree.
And we need to really think about restructuring as owners. What am I incentivizing? How am I structuring my contracts to purchase value rather than effort? And if we can move the industry just incrementally towards those things, I think then the tools are set free to solve the problems of the future.
Right.
Andy, I guess with that questions, are there specific calls to action that you might want to make to owners? We have a couple folks that work directly with owners. We have an owner or folks in the audience online.
I do think one specific thing is that you mentioned siloed thinking. Maybe think in terms of engineering contracts that go from planning to construction closeout. Things like that. let's not just assume that the way that we've done everything contractually, the way that we've organized who does what and who's responsible for what at what point in the process, maybe we need to take a step back and say, how does that technology best fit? And maybe there's an opportunity there.
Fantastic. So it's not just rebuilding systems from the ground up. We need to rebuild how we do things and
How we
contract
think about
things.
what we're buying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to the close of our panel, but there are there's opportunity for questions. I think there might be some questions online, but also questions in the audience. So please fire away.
Hi, yeah, thanks. John Nolan, Network Rail in the UK. Questions from Mike. I really admire the challenge you set yourself to re-baseline how you're going to work, and it's a massive challenge. Everyone's spoken today about people and process and technology. As an owner entity, you need to have the people to have the skills to do the handover and handback of all this data. What's your strategy behind that? Because we're in a similar journey. How we manage, and as an asset owner, we manage that data and information. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? What do you think the challenge is with the people and the skill set to be able to work with the other parties on the board, on the panel here, for the exchange of asset information and the whole asset life cycle as part of that?
Okay. First part I'll address is the people, then I get to the asset side. So a few things that we're working on from a people's perspective is, again, working across with our partners and understanding what those roles are, because they probably already have that role in place. And from an owner's perspective, we may not have that. So we're trying to learn what that is. We're going through that phase now, and then we're backing that into our academia. So what we've also found out is we're not teaching to a level in our institutions to get those people into the workforce at the proper skill level. So I've kind of changed what I used to say is workforce development. I'm starting to get to workforce readiness now. And we're trying to get the workforce ready so when they enter that, they're ready to go. And that may not be, or I might upset some folks in here. It might not be an engineer role anymore. It might be something else. And what we're trying to do in the United States, and more specifically in Oklahoma, is leaning into this thought process of micro-credentialing and getting that, getting into the construction side of it, construction inspectors may not need to be an engineer in the future, but we're going to upskill them and give them a credential so they can start that work early in maybe right after high school, I'm not sure. But we're kind of working into that. The second part of your question on the asset side of it, can you repeat it again? I'm sorry, I just made Alan run.
I guess it's kind of interlinked because it's about controlling the exchange of asset information. Because as an owner, you need to have that central hub of the as-is state, and what your thoughts are behind exchanging information to the supply chain and getting that information fed back into the wider digital sphere, I suppose.
So yes, so from us, we're changing that idea. Like some say, well, model centric. We're also looking at it from asset centric. So there's an idea. It's like I'm just delivering a model. There you go. We're throw it over the fence. The other way is it was PDF or even in plan set. So you delivered it, threw it over the fence. We gave it to Andy. Andy built the thing, and we audited it, and that was the end of it. Now we're trying to get all that data back into our systems, but that also requires us to rebuild or rethink. And how do we allow the contractor into things, looking at a product like Synchro or different things like that. So it's rethinking and rebuilding things at systems and those processes that have been, I don't want to say analog systems, okay? And rethinking that, try to get that asset information rather than having a human having to code it.
That's good.
Great question.
I would also like to follow up on this question. Joost Gevaert from Bedrock, by the way. Could you elaborate a bit more on what kind of data governance and IT infrastructure you're developing, and how open data standards and open source software fit into this, such that you create resilient IT infrastructure?
Absolutely. Can I have another hour? So data governance is one of my passions, so thank you for asking that question. The dirty laundry is that the DOTs don't have great data governance. And the reason why is because that information was just siloed and people just did whatever they wanted. It was like the Wild West. United States, Wild West. So it's like, everybody just did whatever they want. So now we're having to come back and try to figure out what does data governance mean. We do have some standards out there that we can lean on that kind of tell us what we can do, what we should do, like naming conventions, schemas, things like that. So that's what we're actively trying to deploy to where we can start making these systems a little more resilient, to where they can start talking to each other more. Did that answer your question? No?
Well, that's the data standards.
The data standards, okay.
And you also need to build IT infrastructure. And,
Yeah.
do you build this in an open source way? Yeah, to quickly repeat what I was asking as a follow-up for people online, that you elaborated on open data standards and data governance, but then you also need a system as an asset owner and therefore data owner to be able to visualize this data, to be able to give other stakeholders access to this data that you own, etc. And how do you structure your contracts with your software vendors, like the people that build these systems for you, in such a way that you create? Does it need to be open source software? That's part of the question that I have to you, but that you create resilient IT infrastructure to manage your data that you own.
Yeah, so you're over the target. I think you pretty much answered the question for me. So it's the open standards is a big part of it, and that wasn't like really in the beginning. That's what we found through our gap analysis work, and believe it or not, not everybody uses the same applications that I use. And so we have to build a system that allows that open data transfer back and forth to make this whole dream actually work. We're just getting started in that process of understanding what data governance is. We are building a data lake. The first thing that we tackled was our bridge information, and we got that going into the data lake, and now we're going to go into the construction information and start bringing that in, I believe, is the next step. So it's that elephant. We're taking little pieces and then wrapping that up with governance, schemas, open standards, and then pushing that into a GCP, and then kind of moving on from there.
And Mike, I guess it also ties back to some of the things that were announced earlier today with what Patrick talked about with the open data formats and being able to exchange information, because DOTs do use products from many different vendors. And whether it's open source or not, I think the ultimate goal is being able to interoperate information so you can make the right decisions, because the way software is developed is one thing, but it's how you want to use it to be able to extract the right information from these different systems to make better, earlier decisions, right? So.
Yep.
That's good.
And I don't know, Andy, if you want to add anything from I know that's a question to an owner, but we have other stakeholders here.
Data governance is relevant for everybody.
I was having a conversation earlier today just about how to structure. Even so, if you're managing your design in a model-centric way, how do I structure that in order for it to be repeatable and scalable? So I don't just have the same, I just take all of the base files of the design and dump that into a visualized environment. How do I create a structure on top of all of that data that's going to be coming from a lot of different sources? Somebody mentioned underground utilities. We've got GIS data, multi-authoring tools. You've got information that's coming at you from many different places. How am I going to get that all gathered up and published? One of the things that we've done is we've developed a structure that sits on top of all of the various authoring tools that's standardized, so that if I have, and we have projects like this where we have 600 different people who are accessing the same environment from 80 different organizations, not all of them are specialists. Right? Not all of them understand CAD, not all of them are so it's got to be intuitive. The naming structures have to be something that somebody, if we really want to scale this and push it out to a large user base, it's got to be an intuitive structure that can be accessed in that web environment. And that's what we've started doing, is building that structure on top of the underlying data, so that the data that comes into the visualized environment is intuitive, and I can understand what I'm looking at. I can navigate the model. I can get to what I need to quickly to make the decision that I need to make. And the I in that sentence is, 80 different personas across the whole project.
Thanks, Andy. Any other questions from the audience? And
I'll just
yeah.
I'll just add a thought. So yeah, thanks for the question from Network Rail. I look forward to some more later. Basically, we have been discussing all day that if there is works done in the public realm, on the public highway, and this depends, by the way, we've got an international audience. It depends on the jurisdiction you're in. Depends on your own legal regulatory framework. But if I talk about, and in fact we're in the Netherlands, so the Netherlands has enshrined in law that public works have to consult 8 or so key registers, right? And they are defined in law. There is a topographic register, a hydro register, a utility register, a tree register, and these have to be consulted. And then data that gets gathered under a public works contract has to be given back to the relevant agency, which could be the groundwater agency or the topographic agency, the cadastre. In the UK, we have an emerging similar situation that Network Rail might or is increasingly asking for the data that was gathered as part of a contract for Network Rail. But the current problem is that causes a bit of anxiety and fear at Network. I'm not you, but if there's an organization, suddenly you've got a huge challenge coming your way that you previously didn't have. So we want to all do this, but the systems and workflows and skills and resources are not necessarily there on the government side. And again, we're in silos because potentially this shouldn't be Network Rail, this should be the Department for Transport. And then you talk to the Department of Transport and talk to them about digital twin and data lakes, they're probably all just going to close the door and put the phone down to you. So, but I think there is certainly a movement into that direction. I think the Netherlands is a really good example to look to how the government has organized. And this doesn't involve private sector. It's not about every single ground investigation for housing development. It is for the big public sector works, which in the keynote today was presented. That's why things do tend to actually work quite well in the Netherlands because,
So it is possible and it is being done.
Yeah, I was sorry to get the question to you.
Yeah.
But it seems to be very laborious to check 7 or 8 different agencies to check different sort of data, and eventually part of your delivery would influence those 7 stakeholders in some extent, because probably some assets will be handed to each of them or part of them. So don't you think that a kind of a standard, I don't know, could be coming from ISO or any an entity of a standardization, that standard, don't you think that thing would help at least, guys like us, for example, because we usually request from our clients, okay, what is the data dictionary? What do you want to see? What do you want to have us delivering to you? And our struggle is exactly as you say. Okay, the electricity team, okay, they've got one database. The utilities, there's a different one, and then they've got the rail agency, it's a different one, and then the amount of work we have to kind of create different database for each stakeholder. Eventually, there's a lot of time consuming. Okay, data is data, but it requires people to manage, people to handle. Or we can use the most sophisticated AI, but someone needs to teach that.
The answer is actually quite simple. There's a responsibility for a government that legislates the sharing and two-way process. There is a responsibility to provide data standards, formats, models, and systems that make it as easy as consuming an ordnance, a cadastre layer in your environment. You make some edits, and then you submit that data back in the format that was requested.
But if you didn't have the legislative requirement, zero would happen, right?
So I personally, this is not UK government opinion, but my personal opinion is that in some of those areas there needs to be regulation and create a level playing field so that all the bidders and contractors and work on the same terms and conditions, which is the current model the UK government is favouring.
And then if you think of the digital twin concept, the only way to get a full digital twin if it is with standards. So how we get like a city like Amsterdam? So you design and build a part of the tram system, and then you get the tram. So you design, delivery. Okay, here's the train system. How that new section will fit in the big picture? How that thing will fit in the big like digital twin, unless you've got the structured data standardized.
I think Rafa and Holger, you've basically brought us back to the concept that I think all of you are doing your part to advance this in the industry, but there does need to be some top-down changes, whether it's contractual regulations, to essentially make a major change in the way we do things if we really want to build resilient infrastructure. Otherwise, we're going to continue to do things the way we have done. Maybe we'll improve some things, but we really won't see the kind of change that we would like to see until that top-down change happens. I think we're at time, so I do want to thank all of you for your wonderful participation and comments. I want to thank the audience, both here and online. And Barwell from Amsterdam.
Can you just stay there?
I guess we're going to take a picture.
I like that.
We need to have our own little moment of fame. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Share that.
I will do.
Well done.